I'm going to actually skip these because I'm hoping that all of you on the call are aware of the process. But what I've given you here is sort of a bonus prize, is just my overview of the process. Now, if any of you logged into today's, yeah, we'll pause at this one for a second and go through it. But if any of you logged into today's webinar because you were looking for an introduction to the seller's process, and after reviewing the slides that Elizabeth just skipped, you still have questions, feel free to email myself or Elizabeth or Joel, and we will fill in any gaps. At the 1:40 hour Eastern time, I think we want to get to some more of the good stuff, and hopefully you agree I've been more focused on sharing my deepest thoughts about the state of the marketplace as opposed to just, you know, boringly reading you slides I had prepared. But let's go to this one. Okay, so this is just a reiteration of the three major phases from the seller's perspective. The preparation side, the marketing side, and of course the closing. You know, getting the right team pulled together, getting the right lawyer, the investment banker, the accountant, valuation consultants, any special industry consultants, getting those people all on the same page, honestly identifying strengths and weaknesses of the company, fixing some of those weaknesses before we go to market. One of my favorite tools is to do a mock legal audit, where we'll come in and do a legal audit or mock due diligence. You know, just, I'm sure Joel would agree, and Joel's probably got 20 war stories on this, but just the physical process of logging things into the data room can be eye-opening for many sellers. You know, forcing them to deal with a 20-page due diligence checklist and assigning someone in confidence, because, of course, a big issue for the seller is who knows what when. But assigning someone who will be responsible for loading up that data room or working with the investment banks to load up the data room, that alone can be shocking to many sellers. Joel, any funny stories on that one?
Well, yeah, we have a lot of our investment bankers who have realized that, and rather getting organized at the last minute, which inevitably results in information not being available, potentially the confidence eroding of the buyer. They try to get their customers ready ahead of time, and obviously getting organized and getting the information ahead of time is going to make a big difference when it comes to moving the process efficiently through.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put, Joel's going to kill me after this for putting him on the spot 3 or 4 times, but I just think that, this may be war stories from the investment banker itself as opposed to the hosting platform, but I'm sure all of you have been through the CEO or founder of the company falling off his or her chair when they realize the amount of data that's going to be populated into the data room and how much time and effort they need to put into that, the preparation of the SIM, the confidential information memo. I mean, it's an overwhelming process, and many of them are still trying to run their business as they get through this process. Obviously, on the marketing side, understanding who the targets are, who will initiate contact, who will manage the communications, whether due diligence will be on a phased basis, which is very much preferred these days, particularly if the seller is going to entertain buyers that are in the same industry as them. We're seeing a lot of phasing of the due diligence, which is just probably a good idea to begin with. And then, of course, managing, keeping the momentum going through the deal risks, including all kinds of things that happen, from due diligence to employment and labor matters to IT matters, to third-party approvals. There's so many things right now that are deal killers or deal derailers, which make them more difficult to get back on track. Next slide.
Andrew, just a quick question from Mark. It was a great question, really relevant to this slide, so I wanted to ask it. During the marketing phase of the seller's perspective, should the seller consider performing preliminary reverse due diligence against potential targeted buyers as well?
Wow. Great. That's from Mark?
Yes.
Yeah, and I apologize, guys. I'm on full screen, so Elizabeth is monitoring the text chat box. But excellent question. I think that I'm a huge proponent of reverse due diligence. In fact, particularly based on the consideration that's going to be provided in the transaction. So, in the event that that you think your seller client is going to be taking stock or even notes on deferred compensation basis, you need to really know your buyer. Just ask some of the sellers of small and middle-sized companies that sold out to the roll-up kings of the late 90s who took all stock for their transaction, sold third and fourth generation family businesses, and are now sitting on a bunch of worthless toilet paper. Sorry, I mean share certificates. Sorry, I'll try and keep it clean. To show their families as to why they gave up the family business. So, yeah, I think that if the seller has a good idea of who the buyers may be, doing reverse due diligence to begin accumulating data, to begin ranking potential buyers is all a great best practice. The other thing I would urge, Mark, on this is that it's not just financial due diligence. It's also reputational due diligence, looking at both, quantitative strength, but also qualitative reputation. If your company, if the seller's company's got 300-400 employees, that's 300 or 400 families, 300 or 400 lives that are going to be affected by who the buyer is. So part of the reverse due diligence is around corporate culture and leadership and governance and integrity and some of the other things that are going to be really important to your employees on a post-closing basis. Great question. We've had all great questions so far, so keep them coming in the next 15 minutes and certainly keep them coming in the October, November, and December sessions.
I just have one clarification question, if that's all right. We have a question from David asking, what's an example of phased due diligence?
Okay, great question, David. So phased due diligence would be if let's say you are a government contractor or an IT or technology company, and you've got, imagine sort of 3 concentric circles. At the outermost circle is basic information on the company. I mean, pretty stuff that, you'd provide to a commercial banker in connection with the loan, stuff that may even be on your website. I mean, it's not all that proprietary, and the consequences of that information getting into the hands of a buyer who's acting in bad faith is not all that significant. Think of the next concentric circle in as being some pretty, confidential information. I mean, employee lists, employee compensation data, customer pipeline reports, etc. Those are things that you really may not want to make available just to any old buyer, even under an NDA. And those might come in phase 2 due diligence. And then phase 3, staying with my concentric circle analogy, imagine now the inner core of the concentric circles, and in that inner core is just highly proprietary stuff. And that may only be disclosed perhaps once we have a signed LOI and we've narrowed down the buyers to 1 or 2. And so more and more companies are phasing in their due diligence and phasing in their population of the data room in order to protect against, that information slipping out prematurely. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.